Crank up the volume and get ready for real-world bird hunting by listening to the Wingmen podcast by Eastman's. Now your host, Todd Helms.
All right, hey guys, Todd Helms here with the Wingmen podcast for the second episode of our podcast. I've got Brandon Mason, who is Brandon, why don't you tell everybody what you do here with Eastman's, and we'll kind of roll into things. Go ahead and tell everybody what you do. Introduce yourself.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, Todd. Well, I've been with Eastman's now for a little over 10 years, which is hard to believe. And my main job here at Eastman's is I work with manufacturers and advertising companies to help them build their marketing plans with us, and also to get the gear in that we use and test in the field so we can do our gear reviews and we can have all the gear we need for our video projects in the field. That's the main thing that I do. Of course, as you know, Eastman's is a family-owned small business, which is really fun to work at because we get to wear a lot of different hats. But that's my main purpose.
We've got like 4 different hats that we wear around all the time.
Yeah, especially now with not that Wingman's new, but when we launched Wingman, that was pretty cool. It was something that was definitely different than what we were used to.
Yeah, no, that was really cool. Well, and you're right, Brandon, and Brandon, you do an awesome job making sure we get what we need from partners and from advertisers. We always have the right gear when we need it. Very seldom are we waiting on stuff, and that is due in large part to the work that you put in on that front. And we wouldn't be able to do anything Wingman related without shotguns, clothing, shells, or ammunition, all that stuff, and you take care of that. And you've landed us some pretty cool stuff outside of that realm as well. And so I really appreciate what you do, and I wanted to have you on and visit about how you got your start wing shooting, upland hunting, waterfowl hunting, turkey hunting. Those are all things that are they're kind of entry level, I guess. And what I mean by that is anybody can do them. Granted, the more involved you get, the more money things come into play and different things, but everybody has ducks and geese available to them across all the flyways. Everybody pretty much has turkeys available to them, and everybody has some sort of upland bird somewhere in the nation. In the upper Midwest, growing up, we had rough grouse and woodcock, and those are what we had. We had some sharp-tailed too. You grew up in North Dakota. You had a slew of upland game birds there. And I think for a lot of people, their first hunt tends to be small game. It tends to be upland birds or waterfowl, but that's what they do. My first game animal that I shot was a rough grouse. And so I'd like to hear some of your experiences growing up. And then you had a great spring. You guys didn't harvest a bird, but you hunted the hard way. And I'm really interested to hear some of your stories about this spring hunting turkeys with traditional archery equipment. I know you had some close calls, and I want to hear more of that story. So if you wouldn't mind, man, just launch into telling us more about Brandon Mason.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, like you said, I grew up in North Dakota, mostly. I grew up and lived most of my life in the western half of the state. And I ended up going to college in the eastern part. But North Dakota is kind of a unique animal. A lot of people don't know just how game rich it really is. And I'm sure a lot of my friends are going to shoot me for talking about it here because they don't want everybody that doesn't already know to know it. But
Brandon, you've got some banging going on someplace. I don't know if it's plosives.
Can you hear that? Or is it better now?
That's better. It's a little quieter.
Okay. But yeah, we were, growing up in North Dakota, there's so much to do in the outdoors. Obviously I'm a big game enthusiast. I grew up hunting mule deer, in the Badlands of Western North Dakota, but also growing up in that part of the state, there's a lot of upland bird opportunities. And I remember vividly when I was 8 or 9 years old, hunting with a 410 shotgun that was my grandpa's. When my dad would have a day off from the oil field, and which was pretty rare, but when he actually had a day off, we would go out and chase sharp-tailed grouse around. So when we weren't chasing mule deer, one of my dad's things that he loved to do was to hunt sharp-tailed grouse, which a lot of people, it's kind of surprising to me how few people have ever hunted them and or have ever seen them. And in western and central North Dakota, there's quite a few of them. There's not as many as there used to be because the habitat's changed, compared to what they need. But there's still pockets where there's a lot of sharp-tailed grouse. And then, of course, North Dakota and South Dakota are known for pheasants as well. And so all through high school, hunted pheasants quite a bit and sharp-tailed grouse. I was kind of spoiled because I still have an uncle who works for a big sporting goods store in that part of the country, and he would bring out. Here I am as a 16-year-old. I can remember this too. He brought the Browning rep out with him to hunt sharp-tailed grouse with my dad and I, and so here I am, a 16-year-old that doesn't even know what a good shotgun is, and I'm shooting an over and under Satori. And ever since then, I've been hooked on over and unders, and not realizing how much they cost most of the time, and
Right.
just how that's sort of a nostalgic shotgun for a lot of bird hunters. I was hooked ever since then, and I wanted an over and under. And then, of course, I ran down to my local sporting goods store and I thought, I'm gonna save up buy an over and under as a 16-year-old. Yeah, that didn't happen once I saw how much most of them actually cost. But anyway, so yeah, it was kind of a neat upbringing with different relatives that I had, and especially my dad taking us out. And then a lot of my friends in high school were big bird hunters. I was probably more into big game hunting than they were. They big game hunted a little bit, but they were big waterfowlers and pheasant hunters especially. And the South
The
Central.
The Dakotas are so known for pheasants. I mean, it's like if you're growing up in the Midwest, in the upper Midwest, I lived so far north that we didn't have pheasants. We did not have the habitat for pheasants. We grew up in the woods, and it was a dream to go to North or South Dakota and hunt pheasants. And I remember the very first time I did it, it blew my mind. So to grow up with that in your backyard, man, you're lucky.
Well, talking about taking good bird hunting for granted, that I remember in high school vividly that, and this isn't I remember back in the good old days type story, but seriously, it was, in the heyday of the CRP program. So the CRP program, which
Right.
put a lot of habitat on the ground and dealt with erosion control and all that, was about probably, I don't know, 6 years old when I was in high school. And so it was really coming into its own. A lot of the grasses and forbs that were planted were doing well. And, they planted in the CRP fields, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them, they have what's called DNC, dense nesting cover.
Sure.
And so you'd go out and
let me stop you for 1 second. The DNC, because that dovetails into something else. Brandon is a wildlife biologist by trade. That is what you went to school for, correct? To college
Correct,
for.
yep.
So you have a degree in wildlife biology. You worked for the North Dakota, I guess, Department of Game and Fish for a while. So when Brandon says things like he's giving you information right now about the CRP and the dense nesting cover and throwing out terms like that, this isn't stuff he's just read. This is stuff he has first-hand experience and knowledge with. And I know we lean on you in that regard here around the office on the big game side of things as well. Kind of your biologist expertise at different levels. So when you hear Brandon talking about that stuff, he knows what he's talking about. And I know I, for one, really appreciate having that perspective in the office that you can just go lean on. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I wanted to give you a little bit of your bona fides there.
No, that's no problem. And some of that stuff, like any job that you do, you take for granted what you learn in the job or on the job. And sometimes when you are talking about certain components of that job outside of that job, you forget that not everybody's on the same page. And that's with any career, any job that you're a former teacher, a former educator, and you would, I know around the office sometimes you say things that I'm like, you lost me. I don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
But yeah, so with that, back to the whole nesting cover that was planted in the late 80s. I mean, it was planted other time periods too, but there's a heavy enlisting in the federal agencies with the CRP program, and so the upland bird numbers and the waterfowl numbers just exploded. And I remember vividly in high school going with one of my friends to his uncle's farm near Almont, North Dakota, and we got out of our vehicles, walked into the edge of a CRP field, and there were so many pheasants that got up. Oh, I mean, it was about a 20-minute constant wall of birds that just kept exploding into the sky, so much so that, at first you try to get your gun up to shoot, but there's so many hens mixed in that you couldn't pull off a shot because there's just way too many birds together. And
Right.
then after a couple minutes of that, you pretty soon you just rest your shotgun on your shoulder and just admire what you're watching. I mean, even at that time when we were used to seeing a lot of birds, that was ridiculous. I mean, there were so many pheasants that got
Wow.
up. In fact,
Wow.
I remember he would go out there oftentimes if I'd pick a little bit harder spot to hunt where it'd take me most of the day to fill my quota of 3 birds or my bag limit. He would call me later that night, because before we had cell phones, and I'd say, "Hey man, how'd you do today?" Well, and keep in mind, this hunting spot was an hour from where we lived. He would be back at home, birds cleaned, on the couch watching football with a limit of 3 birds by 1 o'clock. And it's an hour, 2 hour round trip drive.
And was there in North Dakota, is there a delayed start time? Like I know South Dakota, you can't start until 10 o'clock in the morning, and that's to give the birds time to get away from the roosts and get out in loafing cover or feed locations for the day. Is North Dakota have anything like that?
It doesn't, but I will tell you this: most of the places, except for a couple phenomenal off the charts places like I just mentioned, most of the time with experience, you're so used to, we're so programmed that you had to get up at the first crack of dawn, get out there and start hunting. That's what you're supposed to do when you're
Right.
going hunting or fishing or whatever. Well, we learned that we were money ahead and time ahead. We just sleep in, which felt like a cardinal sin to do, but we would sleep in and really not get it get after it too hard until 10:30, 11 o'clock, and the birds would be settled down, and we'd have a much more controlled, fun experience, and we would have our birds by noon.
Right.
And if we went out at first light, we would chase them around until 11 o'clock, and then we would have our birds by noon. And so we
Right.
just started figuring, why don't we just sleep in till like 10, grab a bite to eat, and go out there, and we'd still have the same success at the same time, and with a lot less frustration. And
Sure.
especially with pheasants. I mean, they like to run, and it's not considered very sporting when you ground ball them and shoot them on the ground. But
Well,
yeah,
yeah,
so
not only that, it's flat out dangerous, in a
well, if
lot
you're
of
using dogs, especially.
situations, you got dogs or a
Yeah.
large group of people. But yeah, no, that's really interesting that you talk about that. I would have given my eye teeth as a kid to have some of those hunts that you had growing up. And I mean, still to this day, the plain states are where it's at for pheasant hunting, but there's a lot
Yeah.
more there too. I mean, there's the native grouse species, you have prairie chickens, and you have sharp-tailed grouse, and you get down into western Iowa, and I know the quail numbers are still good in places like Iowa or Kansas for that matter, and even down into Texas, you can get into some really, really good bird shooting. And I don't
Yeah.
know. Upland game birds they still to this day hold a special place in my heart. And out here where we live in Wyoming, it's a little bit tougher. We have pheasants. We have good numbers of pheasants in certain areas, but a lot of it is like the video we filmed a year ago. It's planted birds, and for a lot of people, that is the reality of pheasant hunting in today's world. But it's still there, still available, and we have the wild birds that we do have here when it comes to pheasants they're wily and they're tough to get on.
Yeah.
But we have chucker hunting out here, which is pretty unique. There's not a lot of chuckers. They're not a very geographically widespread bird in the United States and North America. but we have some of the best shucker hunting in the world right here in Wyoming. And so that's a lot of fun. But so you had this love for over and unders. You had you grew up hunting pheasants. Where is that taking you? How have you moved forward? And I guess, for lack of a better term, matured as a bird hunter?
Well, one of my first loves in life is archery. And when the archery bug bit me in high school, man, I was just completely consumed by it. And then I don't remember where we found the video, but there's an old video called The Legendary Hunts of Ben Pearson, and it shows him wing shooting with a recurve. And I was completely blown away. And so I don't think it was until I got to college when I was finally able to afford a recurve, and I fletched my arrows with, flu fletching, which is like uncut feathers. For those that aren't familiar with what that is. So it slows your arrow down quicker, it doesn't go as far. They kind of fly like a lawn dart where they're going really fast and then boom, they just go straight down and hit the ground. And so when I was in my seasonal jobs with the Game and Fish Department and the Forest Service in college, I had nothing to do at night. So I was one of the years in particular, I was staying in an old camper, and right next to the field station I was working at was a great big field. And we would, well, not we, I would go out there with a Frisbee and my recurve, and I would throw the Frisbee for myself, and I would see how quickly I could shoot at the Frisbee before it got too far. And then also I wanted to be accurate. So it got to the point where I practiced so much when I was in my late teens and early 20s that I could hunt, or I could hit a Frisbee pretty consistently about 6 or 7 out of 10 times in the air.
That's impressive.
And then I have done a little bit of bird hunting with it. Every time I've laid in the decoys in a field after geese, the geese don't come in. So either they're scared or probably not, that I'm sure, but they've seen me shoot. but with pheasants, I have man, I've done everything but actually bring one down. I haven't spent a ton of time actually hunting that way, mostly because I'm with guys who have dogs that obviously don't want me launching a sharp stick in the air and while their dogs are around. But when I've been without a dog, which obviously bird hunting without one is a challenge, but when I've gone out in like late season, I really like where I would hit a cattail slough or river bottoms with a bunch of thick cover, and backwater areas of like the Missouri River.
Sure.
I hit a lot, and there's a bunch of thick cattails, and I would just bust through them. Me and a buddy would usually go out, and I would, shoot at them with my flu arrows. And I've shot through the primary feathers on the wings, to where, just another half an inch, if even, I would have brought them down.
Sure.
I've nicked them in the feathers on the back as they're flying left to right. And just, it's really neat. It adds a whole another dimension to your shooting when you can see the projectile going for the animal in the air. And
I bet
it's like
that
throwing
really,
a football.
Right.
Yeah, it's like throwing a football, trying to hit a receiver, going for the end zone. And that anticipation as you're watching it, and not just me, but even whoever's with me, it's amazing, the cheers and the, oh man, you almost got him, or oh man, you nicked him, or you can see where the arrow's going, and it's like it's on this path, it's going to hit him, and it just barely misses. Of course, you're aiming for a small target, but pheasants are pretty fun to hunt with a bow like that. Turkeys, obviously, which we'll get into the story of the spring. But I tried one time to hunt sharptails with them, and that was an exercise in futility. They're just too quick off the ground. And now I know guys that have done it. I actually know a guy that pass shot a partridge, believe it or not, and he admits that it was dumb luck that he hit it. But he was out hunting birds with his bow, and actually a covey of partridge got up, and he knocked one right out of the air with it, which is amazing. I mean, that's
pretty crazy.
Yeah,
because the grouse and then the Hungarian partridge, like you're saying, they definitely seem to flush a lot faster than a rooster pheasant. That, and wild roosters are pretty quick, no doubt about it. But there's something about a bird like a grouse that can reach maximum speed, flight speed in about 3 wing beats, that is, that would be tough with archery tackle, no doubt about it. Well, we should go try that again. I think we should definitely try the goose thing and see if we can get you a goose this fall, this winter with a recurve. I would really like to see that, and I think our listeners would like to see it and hear about it. I think that's a podcast opportunity right there, man.
Yeah, for sure. It's just a blast. I mean, once you learn to instinctively shoot, it's kind of like riding a bicycle. You don't really forget, and it does take maybe a little more practice. And people say it takes so much more practice than shooting a compound with sights. I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, I'm 43 years old, and I've been shooting instinctively since I was 16, and so that's a long time of developing your internal sights, I guess. And it takes a little adjustment between different bows. I've shot recurves, long bows. I got several different recurves at home. I shoot instinctively with my compound, and it's not. I mean, it's really not that different. A few arrows into it, you get a feel for the bow, and you're good to go.
Well, and not to mention, it is the same. It's the same principle. Shooting instinctive archery tackle is the same principle as shooting a shotgun.
Right.
You're not aiming as much as you're pointing.
Right.
And
Exactly.
you're letting your hand-eye coordination run the show. People don't have to think. I heard about it like this. You don't have to think when you pick up a ball to throw it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to think about, I need to throw it here, and so I got to aim over here with it. You just pick it up and throw it.
And you forget how much training that took as a kid.
Right.
As a kid, when you're a 3-year-old and you're picking up a ball, you didn't have that perception of how to throw it, coordination and all that. But once you have it, who has to remember how to throw a baseball? Nobody.
Right. And it's the same with shooting a shotgun. And I'm sure shooting instinctive archery, through repetition, your brain tells your hand tells your body what to do, basically. And it's pretty amazing. And I know for me, when I make a really lights out, incredible shot with a shotgun on a bird, it's usually because I didn't have time to think.
Exactly.
Something happened quickly, and I had to react to the situation. And you make the shot, and you're like, "Whoa!" And then when you get one all lined up and it's coming in, and whether geese are terrible with this because they're big, they seem like they're moving slow, and you should be able, 3 for 3, no problem on geese. Well, you see guys that go out, and the dudes that can do 3 for 3 on geese are pretty rare, and do it consistently. And I know the shots that I have missed the worst are always the ones that I have time to think about. And it's like I'm premeditating in my mind how this is going to work out and how it's going to go. And you end up picking your head up or stop your swing, or you do whatever. You don't just let your body make it happen.
I was the same way in basketball. And I know you were a basketball player and coach and everything. And I probably, align with this and I didn't realize I was doing this. I remember, I think I was a junior in high school, and my coach pulled me aside and he said, "You need to quit thinking and just shoot the basketball." He said, "You're an instinctive shooter." He said, "You need to catch the ball and shoot," because when I would think, I would miss every time. And when I would just catch the ball and shoot, not that I made it every time, but that my shooting percentage was a lot higher.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember I had a string when I was shooting skeet league in the summertime. I had a string. I was younger, probably in my early 20s, and shot a lot. And man, I hit a slump. I went into a slump. I could not break more than 16 targets, and it was always the same birds that I was dropping on the skeet course. On the skeet field, it was stations 3, 4, and 5, the crossing birds. And I could always hit the high house, but the low house I could not break. And unfortunately, that carried over into station 6 and 7. I was dropping the high house bird too. And some of those angles are pretty simple, But one of my buddies stopped me one evening, and he said, "Dude, I can see the wheels turning in your head as soon as you step in that box. The minute you step in that box to shoot, you're thinking." He's like, "You need to take like a couple weeks off and not shoot, not pick up a gun, and just come back and see what your body remembers."
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, the very first round back, I broke a 24. And it was like, wow, mental reset, and I was good to go.
Yep.
And so it's funny how those instinctive practices that once you hone the fundamental skills, man, they're there and they don't go away. You might get rusty, and it behooves every single one of us to go out ahead of season and shoot a shotgun and get some trap in, get some sporting clays or some skeet in, because if you just wait and don't do any of that, you're gonna struggle the first few hunts of the season, no doubt. But it's amazing how fast it all comes back.
Well, and in some of that mindset goes along with, I don't know, sometimes I think when we get in a groove of what we're doing as hunters, we start to outthink ourselves. And so even the shooting aside, just the hunting practices, sometimes we can overthink it. Case in point, this spring on that turkey hunt that we keep referencing, my son wanted to, he's 14, and he wanted to do it with his recurve or nothing. And so we went recurve only on the hunt. It's just he and I. And we patterned some turkeys. We set up some decoys. We did the whole morning hunt thing, and there's just too many of them. They didn't want to cooperate. They didn't even come down from this hill that they were roosting up on to really look at what we had set up or anything. They'd respond to the calls and everything, but they just weren't overly interested. And so I'm thinking we need to back out of there and try a different approach for the evening. And my son said, "Why don't we just go up into the hills after them?" I'm thinking, yeah, right. Good luck with that. And what's going to happen is we're going to walk in there to the first group of thick timber, and they're going to blow up and get out of there.
Right.
And we're not, we're going to ruin it for the next couple of days or whatever. And I thought, you know what, though, this is a good experience. Even if we blow him out of there, it'll be a learning experience for him. Well, it was actually a learning experience for me, because we started still hunting, following the turkeys, and you could hear them clear as a bell, not that far away. And then they kind of shut up, and I'm thinking they probably heard us quietly stepping and took off. He turned back to say something to me, and not 10 yards through the cover, this Tom belts out a bugle. Oh my gosh, did I just say that? See, we always liken it to September elk hunting, don't we?
Right.
People give us grief for that, but he let out a gobble. And
Guy Eastman heard you say that, he'd slap you in the mouth.
and but anyway, and we heard the hens right around him too, and we couldn't. And then we saw them moving through the trees, and they didn't even know we were there. Wow. I couldn't believe it. And so he almost got a shot there. He came to about half draw. He thought he could sneak a shot through an opening in the brush, and he couldn't. And then they just kept feeding up this hill through the pines, and we could hear him going away. And so we just trailed him. He got within 15 yards of them again, and he just couldn't get a shot at, there's a couple Toms in the group, and he just couldn't get a shot at one of them because the hens were surrounding him. And then they ended up spooking and taking off. But so here's my mind thinking, been there, done that, tried to follow him through the trees. It never works. Well, we moved at a, snail's pace, and we're real methodical. And twice we got within archery range of them, and we just couldn't get a shot because of, the cover, or one time there was skyline, there's too many hens in the way. But the point is, we were right there, and they didn't know it, which is pretty phenomenal. There's
using a method that just does not work. You know what I mean? If you ask, traditional wisdom would dictate that you can't still hunt turkeys. You can't. Right. You can't stalk them. You can't still hunt them. That's craziness. And you guys had a very different experience than that, which I find fascinating. Having grown up back in the upper Midwest, hunting eastern turkeys in Michigan that get an enormous amount of pressure, and then having hunted a lot of different populations of birds in different states in the Midwest, you can't you can't move basically. Once you're set up, you not only have to be still, but you have to be hidden as well. And man, we get away with so much out here hunting turkeys. Our birds are, I think a lot of people would call them stupid, but I don't think that's the case. I think that they are a little more naive than heavily hunted eastern birds are. There's no doubt about it. But I think part of that is that they live in such wide open, much more open terrain in a lot of
Yeah.
cases that I think a lot of times they're looking far off for danger, and if it's right in their lap under their nose, I've had birds walk right. Well, we had a situation on our turkey hunt. We were there just before you were, a couple days before, and I got up to keep tabs on a group of birds. We made a move and it wasn't working out, and I just wanted to creep up and get a look over this ridge and see if we could cut them off or how we needed to approach continuing to hunt them. And I had 4 hens catch me. I'm standing up in the wide open and I just froze. I'm about in a half, kind of half stooped over, and I froze, and they walked past me 5 feet, and it's all on camera. We have the whole thing on camera. They walked by me at 5 feet, and I just stood there, did not move. I was wearing the Sitka subalpine, Optifade subalpine, which we could get into that too. I mean, I think that's a phenomenal pattern, especially for spring turkeys. But it's weird. It's almost like they don't care. You're so close to them, you must not be dangerous.
Well,
It's
and even
weird.
even I think part of it, like you said, has to do with the terrain, that whether they're looking far off or not, I don't know, but um it's more conducive to stalking too. There's little cuts and ridge lines, and you can sneak behind a little patch of brush. It's not a wall of impenetrable brush like some of the spots you've told me about where you've hunted in Iowa. Or we're not on the river bottoms. That's a different scenario where you're trying to
Right.
walk through a cottonwood slash Russian olive slash willow slash whatever. River bottom is next to impossible to be sneaky. But when you're up in the hills and out in maybe some more broken country, I mean, it's totally doable to stalk on them. I mean, the first couple of years that I turkey hunted, all we ever heard is that you can't stalk on turkeys, and that's the only way we killed them. In fact, we didn't even own decoys at the time, and we
Right.
didn't even own a call. We didn't even know what we were doing. We just saw some turkeys, went after them, and killed them. We thought, oh, that's pretty cool,
Yep.
and we just treated them like they were deer, and that's how I took the first one that I shot with my recurve on a rainy afternoon years ago, and which got me hooked on bow hunting them. But yeah, it's definitely doable to stalk on them. It just depends on where you are, what state you're in, what part of the
Yeah.
state.
Yeah.
So
No, I agree completely. You try to pull a stalk on a big eastern bird,
yeah,
very seldom does that work out for you. Very, very seldom. And I'm, even shooting a shotgun, that's one of the tactics that I prefer to use when I get a bird located. If I can see him or figure out exactly where he's at, I really like to get as close as I can get before I set up, put out the decoys, or sit down to call, or whatever it may be. I want to be as close to that bird as I can, because it makes it that much easier for him to just slip over and, oh, I'm just going to sneak over here and see what she's all about. You couldn't do that. You couldn't do that in the East. You can't do that in the South. It's some of the things that we get away with out here on our birds are crazy. And I do think that the terrain plays a very, very large role in that. I I don't think those birds are any dumber than they are anyplace else. They're not as heavily pressured, and we definitely have the ability to use terrain to our advantage more so than in other places. And it works. It works. Some of the I've had more than one person come out from the Midwest or the South or back east to hunt birds and hunt turkeys with me out here, and they're flabbergasted at some of the stuff that we can get away with. Whether it's sitting up against a big ponderosa pine with no understory, and you're really exposed. You're really badly exposed. And yeah, we definitely get seen because they do see you, and that's part of where I think the bird's naivete kind of shows is they might see you, but they're not necessarily associating you with a person or a hunter. And where an eastern bird would see you, pick you out from 200 yards away and go, I'm not going over there. And they turn and run
Yeah.
off. And, you hunt those birds back in the Midwest or the East or the South, you have to be hidden. Your outline has to be broken up. You have to be pretty well hidden to consistently score, especially on public land birds. Even if you're using, and even there using terrain to your advantage, a ridge or a hill or a draw, and you hide over the edge of the ridge and call the bird to you, and they peek up over and look, and they've got to come over and look for you, or you the last place you called from, you sneak 20 yards to the side and set up, because then the bird they can pinpoint exactly where you're calling from, and they go to that spot, and you're not there. You flanked them, and they don't see you. There's so many tactics we could. It's crazy, but the fact that you guys had success actually getting into bow range on still hunting turkeys with traditional equipment, I would have killed to have been there to witness that. That would have been really cool.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and it's fun to walk around with a recurve in the woods too. They're really lightweight, and it's not for everybody, but they're not as limiting as what people think. People just see a stick and a string and they think, oh, that's the old days, and that's too hard to do. It's actually not. It's just it takes initially a lot of practice to get your shooting form down and your instinctive shooting down. But once you get that down, it's really not that big a deal.
Sure. Well, I'm definitely going to get you out in the goose field again this year, and I want to see you swat a goose with the recurve. That's
Oh man, that'd be a
my goal.
blast.
We'll get you and your son Hunter out there, and I would love to see you guys pull that off. I think.
Well, we were talking recently in a Wingman meeting. Remember, was that last week? I think we were talking about doing some tips on sitting up to shoot out of
Right.
a layout blind. Practicing that because it's weird. You're not used to shooting that way. Well, imagine laying with a recurve on your chest and trying to sit up and shoot really quick. I mean, holy cow, that takes some practice. That's hard.
Yeah, I know. I hear you. It's a whole other ballgame when you're trying to shit up and shoot.
Yeah.
But,
and between my bugling for turkeys and shitting up to shoot a goose, I just outlined some new tactics.
Yeah, I think we've opened up a whole new can of worms here for this one. Holy
shit. Anything I can do to help,
Yeah, no, that's why we love you, our resident biologist. Oh, and no, I think we've got some opportunity as well with kind of modifying. We've been playing around with some different techniques for decoying waterfowl, especially in dry fields where we're moving away from the layouts quite a bit. Actually, they're harder to shoot out of than say an A-frame, for example. But there's opportunity there, I think, especially on geese. I think we definitely have some opportunity that we'll look for the right setup, and if we can get it, we'll leave the dog at home or make sure he's good and steady, and I want to see that happen because that would be pretty cool. That would be pretty cool to witness. But well, Brandon, I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today and sharing some knowledge and some laughs. I had a good time visiting with you, and it definitely won't be the last time we have you on the podcast for sure.
Yeah, it's always fun. I mean, the fun thing about bird hunting that was weird to me initially when I started is, you go out, when I was a little kid, I was used to hunting big game with my dad, and once he would shoot his mule deer, we were done, of course, and
Right.
went home. Whereas I remember the first time I downed a grouse, we could. Oh, you mean I keep going?
Right.
Well, that's cool. So
Right.
it's just a different animal altogether, and it's really fun. And I mean, I just love being outdoors. And we all have our favorite thing that we do, but people say, what do you like to hunt? I'm like, everything. It's just spending time outdoors and being with friends and family and weapon of your choice, and depending on the activity, maybe a good dog with you. And it's just nothing like it. It's like one of my favorite quotes from Teddy Roosevelt is, "Only he who has partaken thereof can appreciate the keen delight of hunting in lonely lands." It says it all right there.
Yeah, and he doesn't say elk hunting. He's just hunting. And
Right.
I think that's a big part of it. Like I said, going back to when we opened this thing, bird hunting is accessible for most people. They can do it. Whether it's ducks or geese or turkeys or upland birds, most people have some sort of bird hunting pretty close to them, and
Right.
they can get into it. There's a definitely a barrier to entry when it comes to big game, especially out here in the West. It's public land, sure. The access may not be the barrier, but knowing how to, when it comes to elk, especially knowing how to get one out of the field. You're by yourself, and you're a kid, you might not have the ability to do that. But man, a lot of people can go walk a ditch line and flush roosters with the family dog and do some shooting. I know access in a lot of parts of the country is becoming super limited, and it's getting harder and harder and harder to get out and hunt. And we're fortunate here in Wyoming that we have lots of access and we have lots of opportunity. But still, that bird hunting is one of those things that it's just anybody can do it. You grab a shotgun, doesn't matter what you're shooting, whether it's that over and under, that fancy over and under that everybody or that folks aspire to, or it's the old Harrington and Richardson single shot 410.
Right.
Go out and hunt, and those are some of my fondest memories growing up. Like you said, was going out, and it wasn't sitting in a deer blind for me because that was super boring. But my fondest memories were pheasant hunts and grouse hunts and duck hunts, and just love it still to this day. But well, thanks again, Brandon. I appreciate it. We're going to wrap it up and look forward to the next time.
Sounds good, man. Thanks.
All right. Hey guys, that was Brandon Mason with Eastman's Hunting Journals. Brandon's a great friend and a good guy. He does an awesome job there at Eastman's. And obviously here at Wingmen, Eastman's is our parent company. And so they oversee everything we do. And Brandon is basically in charge of, I guess you could call it, procurement, and deals with, if it wasn't for him and what he does, I wouldn't have shotguns to shoot. I wouldn't have, the Wingman crew wouldn't have ammo or decoys or things like that. So Brandon is integral to what we do there, and we got to have him, and he's a great guy. So I appreciate him taking some time and visiting with us. That was awesome. We had a lot of fun, and the only thing better, I think, than maybe sitting down and having a conversation with Brandon is going hunting with Brandon. He and I have been fortunate enough to share some pretty good experiences and made some wonderful memories in the field together, and I'm looking forward to more. Well, thanks for joining us again. I appreciate it, and we will see you in the field.